The morning sun had barely touched the stone walls of the Blackthorn estate when Elira Voss was called to the back gardens. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Marta, handed her a bucket, a brush, and a pair of thick gloves that did not fit properly. "You will clean the wolves' cages today," Marta said, not looking up from her list. "No one else will do it." Elira's hands tightened around the bucket handle. She had heard the stories. The cages sat behind the eastern wall, hidden from the main house, holding wolves too dangerous or too wild to be trusted among the pack. Handlers who went near them came back with torn sleeves and pale faces. Some did not come back to that job at all. "Why me?" Elira asked quietly. Marta finally looked at her. "Because you are the only one left who has not refused." There was no arguing with that. Elira nodded, picked up her supplies, and walked toward the eastern wall with her heart beating fast in her chest. The cages were larger than she expected, built from thick iron bars set into old stone. Inside each one paced a wolf, some gray, some black, some with scars across their backs. Their eyes followed her the moment she stepped through the gate. A low growl rumbled from somewhere in the row of cages, and Elira froze. She thought about turning back. She thought about facing Marta's disappointment instead of a wolf's teeth. But something inside her, quiet and stubborn, told her to keep walking. She set down her bucket beside the first cage. A large gray wolf stood at the bars, watching her with sharp yellow eyes. Elira did not reach for the brush right away. Instead, she knelt down slowly, keeping her movements small and unhurried, the way she used to calm the frightened horses in her old village. "I am not here to hurt you," she said softly. "I only want to clean your home." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. He did not growl again. He simply watched her, his body still tense, but no longer ready to strike. Elira waited a long moment before she reached for the gate latch. When she opened it, the wolf did not lunge. He backed away and let her step inside. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Elira had cleaned 3 cages without a single incident. The wolves that had frightened away every other servant now sat quietly while she worked around them, occasionally leaning into her hand when she paused to rest. She did not know why they trusted her. She only knew that they did. Word of this spread through the estate faster than she expected. By evening, whispers followed her through the kitchen and the servants' hall. The human girl had gone into the cages of the most dangerous wolves in the territory and walked out untouched. Some servants called it luck. Others called it something stranger. One person who heard the whispers did not call it luck at all. Kade Ashworth, Alpha King of the Northern Wolf Territories, sat in his study when his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man named Ren, told him what had happened in the eastern cages. "She went in alone?" Kade asked, not looking up from the papers on his desk. "Alone," Ren confirmed, "and Ronan let her clean his cage without a fight." Kade's pen stopped moving. Ronan was the most dangerous wolf in his sanctuary, a rogue captured after nearly killing 3 of Kade's own guards. Even Kade approached that cage with caution, and Kade was an alpha king whose presence alone could make lesser wolves bow their heads. "Bring her to me," Kade said. But when Ren left to find her, Kade found himself standing at his window instead, looking out toward the eastern wall. He told himself it was concern for his men. He told himself it was simple curiosity about a servant girl who had done something no one else could do. He did not yet let himself think it was anything more. The next morning, Elira returned to the cages, as she had been instructed. She moved down the row with practiced calm now, greeting each wolf with a soft word before she began her work. When she reached Ronan's cage, she paused. He was larger than the others, with a thick black coat and a scar running along his shoulder. His eyes held something sharper than the rest, something that made even brave men hesitate. "Good morning," Elira said gently, kneeling by the bars. Ronan did not growl. He stepped closer, sniffed at her offered hand, and then, to the shock of the guard watching from a distance, pressed his head against her palm. It was in this moment that Kade arrived. He came around the corner of the stone path with long, purposeful strides, his expression unreadable. What he saw stopped him where he stood. His most dangerous prisoner, a wolf who had once nearly torn through iron bars in his fury, was now leaning into a servant girl's touch, like an obedient pup. Something shifted inside Kade's chest, sudden and unfamiliar. It was not simple curiosity. It was something closer to alarm, though he could not yet name why. "Step away from him," Kade said, his voice carrying more force than he intended. Elira startled and rose to her feet immediately, her hand falling from Ronan's fur. The wolf let out a low, displeased sound, but did not move toward the bars. "I meant no harm, my lord," Elira said quickly. He was calm. "I was only cleaning." "I did not ask what you were doing," Kade said, though his tone had already softened slightly. He studied her more closely now. She was young, dressed in plain servant's clothes, with dark hair pulled back and hands roughened from work. There was nothing about her that should have caught his attention, and yet it had. Ren, who had followed behind him, cleared his throat. "My king, this is the girl from yesterday, the one who calmed the entire row without a scratch." Kade said nothing for a long moment. He simply looked at Elira, and something in his gaze made her feel as though he were searching for an answer she did not know how to give. "Why do they let you near them?" he finally asked. "I do not know," Elira admitted honestly. "I only speak to them gently. I do not fear them, and perhaps they sense that." Kade's jaw tightened. It was a simple explanation, and yet it did not satisfy the strange unease building inside him. He turned to Ren. "Have her continue her work, but send a guard to watch from a distance each day." "That is unnecessary, my king," Elira said, before she could stop herself. "The wolves have caused me no trouble." "It was not a request," Kade said, and though his words were sharp, his eyes lingered on her, a moment longer than necessary before he walked away. Over the following days, Kade found reasons to pass by the eastern wall, more often than his duties required. He told himself he was checking on the guards. He told himself he needed to see that Ronan remained secure, but each time, his eyes found Elira first, watching the way she moved among the cages with quiet confidence, the way even his fiercest wolves grew calm under her care. It was on the 5th evening that everything came to a head. Kade arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky turning orange behind the stone walls. He found Elira kneeling beside Ronan's cage again, her hand resting against the wolf's fur, while she murmured something too quiet for him to hear. Ronan's eyes were half closed, utterly at peace. Ren stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with mild amusement. "She has a gift, that one," he said as Kade approached. "Perhaps we should let her tend to all the difficult wolves from now on." "That will not be necessary," Kade said, his voice tight. Ren glanced at him, curious. "You seem troubled, my king. Surely a servant, calming a few wolves is nothing to concern yourself with." Something in Kade snapped, quiet but absolute, like a string pulled too tight for too long. He crossed the distance to the cage in a few strides and reached down, gently but firmly, pulling Elira back to her feet and a step away from the bars. "My king?" she asked, startled again, her cheeks flushing with confusion. Ren, still not understanding, pressed further. "Truly, why does it bother you so much? She has done nothing wrong." Kade's control finally gave way. He turned to face his second-in-command, and the words left him before he could stop them. "She touches them because she's mine." The garden fell silent. Even Ronan lifted his head at the shift in the air. Ren's eyebrows rose in surprise, and Elira stood frozen, staring up at Kade as though she had misheard him entirely. Kade seemed just as startled by his own words. He had not planned to say them. He had not even let himself think them clearly until that moment. But once spoken, he could not take them back, and strangely, he did not want to. "My king," Elira said carefully, "I do not understand." Kade exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing whether to explain himself or walk away and pretend the words had never left his mouth. But something about the way she looked at him, honest and unafraid even now, made him choose honesty in return. "The wolves have not been calming for you by chance," he said quietly. "They sense what I have been trying to ignore since the day you arrived. My wolf recognized you long before I allowed myself to admit it." Elira's breath caught. "Recognized me as what?" "As my mate," Kade said simply. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ren, sensing the moment was not his to intrude upon, quietly excused himself and left the garden, though a small, satisfied smile crossed his face as he went. Elira's mind raced. She was a servant, born to a family with debts and no standing among the pack. She had never imagined herself as anything more than someone who cleaned floors and cared for animals no one else wanted to approach. The idea that the Alpha King, ruler of the Northern Territories, saw her as his mate felt impossible. "I am only a servant," she said softly. "This cannot be true." "It is true," Kade said, stepping closer. "I fought against it because I did not want it to be. A king choosing a human mate is complicated, and I know the pack will not accept it easily, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Elira looked down at Ronan, still resting quietly nearby, then at the other wolves further down the row, all of whom had grown calm and still, as though listening. She thought of how naturally they had accepted her from the very first day, long before she understood why. "They knew before I did," she whispered. "They always do," Kade said. In the weeks that followed, their bond became harder to hide, and harder still to deny. Some among the pack whispered against it, uneasy at the thought of a human standing beside their king. But others noticed what the wolves in the cages already understood, that Elira's presence brought calm where there had once been chaos, and that Kade, since her arrival, carried himself with a steadiness he had not shown in a long time. Rival packs, hearing of the Alpha King's growing attachment to a human girl, saw it as a weakness to exploit. They believed a king distracted by matters of the heart could be provoked into mistakes, but instead of turning him careless, the challenge only strengthened Kade's resolve to protect what mattered to him, and it strengthened Elira's own courage as well. When danger came to test their bond, Kade did not hesitate to stand beside her, not as a king protecting a servant, but as a mate standing beside the person who had somehow tamed both his wildest wolves and his own guarded heart. And Elira, though frightened at times, never once turned away from him. In time, the pack came to see what the wolves in the cages had known from the very beginning. Elira was not simply a servant who cleaned enclosures no one else dared to approach. She was the calm the pack had been missing, the gentleness that balanced the king's strength, and the mate their alpha had been searching for without knowing it. Kade stood before his people one evening, beneath the open sky, Elira's hand held firmly in his own, and declared what his wolf had known from the very start. She was not beneath him. She was beside him, as she was always meant to be. And in the eastern gardens, behind the old stone wall, the wolves who had once frightened every servant who came near, now rested peacefully in their cages, no longer waiting to be feared, but waiting instead for the gentle voice that had shown them, and their king, what it truly meant to belong.